Well, thank you all for being here today. First of all, I want to thank you, Terry, and the Ben Franklin Foundation for inviting me to be here. And I want to thank everybody who is here speaking today and who's involved in this event. I believe it's important, and I'm honored to be here standing before you today. Unfortunately, I don't have a teleprompter to make me look nice and polished, so I'm going to have to look down from time to time and refer to my notes every once in a while. So please forgive me in advance. Because I actually have been known to stray from my notes from time to time. But I will do my best to be on my best behavior. I'm also privileged to get to choose my own words today and speak to you directly from my heart. I imagine that you are here today because, like me, you love freedom and liberty. Amen. After all, the theme for today's event is for the love of liberty. And you would think that we all know what freedom and liberty means. I mean, it would seem to be natural to assume that Americans, and Idahoans in particular, all know what freedom and liberty are, since we live in the land of the free. But I would contend that we can't really love something that we don't even understand. I cannot claim to love my wife if I've never even met her. I mean, I can't even claim to love ice cream if I've never even tasted it. And so I can't really claim to love liberty if I don't know what it is and I haven't tasted the beauty of liberty. You see, just like a fish doesn't know that he's wet because all he knows is the water that he was born in, I would contend that those who live under tyranny don't even realize how much true liberty they're missing out on. You see, I myself am a political refugee. For over 3 decades, I lived in the United Soviet Socialist Republic of California. And by God's grace, my family and I escaped that tyranny over a few years ago. And as humorous as that sounds, it's still remarkable to me to see how conditioned my family and I were in that state. You see, as someone who has counseled many victims of abuse, I can see the signs of abuse in someone when I look into their eyes. I can see it in their posture. I can see it in the way they act and the way they react. And so you can see the signs of tyranny that reigns over people by the way that they act and the way they react. If you've ever met somebody who has escaped the former Soviet Union, then you know exactly what I'm referring to. They're constantly looking over their shoulder. They're constantly wondering what's allowed and what they have permission to do and not do. Why? Because like the fish that was born in the water and grew up in the water and knows nothing else but water, these people know nothing else but tyranny. And remarkably, in the few years that my family and I have spent here in Idaho, I can honestly say that we now see the effects of tyranny that we were subject to for so many years in our former state. But it was all I knew, so I didn't realize what I was missing out on. And that got me thinking, what else do we not realize? Even here in God's country, here in the great state of Idaho. What is it here that we are subject to that we don't even realize because it's all that we've known? Let me give you an illustration of what I mean. Just this last week, Americans by force of law had to file their tax returns, right? This is the rule that we have in America that says that we as citizens must tell our government everything that we've earned and everything we've spent our money on, and then give them a portion of our profits based on the rules that they've set up to extract our money from us. It's a form of legal plunder, and it is all by force. So, like good sheep, we line up and turn over cumulatively over 50% of our earnings every year. That's the figure once you add up all the taxes at all the levels of government and include taxes that are inserted as fees on things like gasoline and energy and everything else. And then what do we do about it? Nothing. We accept it. Sure, some of us complain, some of us hold signs, some of us write letters. But then, even though our forefathers wisely gave us the power to remove those who enact tyranny upon us, we re-elect them anyhow. We keep our abusers in power, and we just take it. After all, a fish doesn't really know that it's wet. I mean, 50% is bad, right? But couldn't it be worse? Well, just to add some context to this, I want you to consider our founding fathers. You see, in 1776, there was no income tax. That didn't come along until 1913, over 130 years later. And guess what? In 1776, the taxes imposed by the British on our forefathers were about 1% in the North and around 3% in the South. And you know what? They considered that to be tyrannical and ultimately fought a war over it. For more context, consider these words that were put into the actual Declaration of Independence to prove to the world that the King of England was a tyrant. I read now from the Declaration of Independence, quote, "He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance." Really? King George erected a multitude of offices, and that made him a tyrant? And folks, that was before the Department of Education, and the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Health and Human Services, and so on. In fact, of the over 450 offices that exist in our federal government, most of them consist of hierarchies of agencies within themselves. In other words, they are bureaucracies within bureaucracies. Our federal government today would make King George blush. And what about the swarms of officers? Well, historians say that, not counting the troops who were here to defend the Western Territory from the French, the number of British officers was well under 1,000 in all of the colonies. That's it. And they mostly resided in port cities where they collected import taxes. In other words, folks, in 1776, the average American colonist had never even met a British officer. But our forefathers believed that was tyrannical. You know why? Because it was. See, we really have no clue. Today, Americans, by virtue of our votes, we surrender more liberty in one congressional session or one legislative session in our own state capitol that I stand in front of right now than our forefathers surrendered to the British Crown in almost 100 years. If you don't believe me, then explain the Idaho State Healthcare Exchange that we passed just right here in the building behind me. Is that liberty? See, here's what's amazing. Today we live under a self-imposed tyranny that is so prevalent, so vast, and so everywhere on us at all times that many of us don't even realize it's there. We're fish and we're wet, and we don't even know it. Our forefathers today are crying out from their graves saying, "Do you even know what liberty is anymore? Do you know liberty? Do you know her? Do you love her? Will you protect her?" I submit to you that we accept tyranny only because we don't know what liberty is. We don't know what it looks like, and so we don't value liberty. And since we don't value it, we are slow to defend it. But let me tell you who does value liberty. Those who have been chained in the bonds of full tyranny. Those who have seen the tanks and armed soldiers pass through their cities, while their oppressors silence those who oppose their government and abuse the people, those few people who have the courage to stand in opposition to their government. In the former communist Russia and in Vietnam and in North Korea and in Iran and Iraq and other dictatorships where people don't have the freedom to speak their mind, to worship according to the dictates of their heart, and they're not free to question their government. They're not free to exercise their dreams, and in many cases, they're not even allowed to have dreams. You see, my friend, this is full tyranny. And it comes once the people have been groomed and conditioned to believe that they cannot stop the force of their government. Once people are convinced that their attempts to preserve peace and prosperity and liberty are fruitless, then and only then can full tyranny rise to power. It has happened countless times in history, in the history of man's relationship to man. And it's happening even now in our country. You see, there's something strange and twisted in the heart of fallen men that desires to rule over and control other men. I can't explain it, but it's there. And we set up our government here in America to prevent that type of lordship and control. But if we are not eternally vigilant to that original cause, we will end up with a government that gives us the very tyranny we set it up to prevent. Years ago, the most interaction that people had with their federal government was the conversation that they had with their mailman from time to time. But today, my friend, Americans turn to the government to feed them, to give them medical aid, to pay their bills, to buy their drugs, to teach their children, to tell them what kind of materials to stay away from, to tell them what they can say and what they can't say, to tell them how they should think, what they should eat, what they can watch, where they can go, and what kind of light bulb you're even allowed to put in your house. And many Americans now let the government grab them, search them, and grope their bodies at the airport, all in the name of security. Because remember, government knows best, and you must submit to your government. Hey, it's great training. You see, folks, this is the America we live in today. I'm sorry, but that's not freedom. That's not liberty. Consider the fact that we have a generation today that has been groomed into thinking that it's okay for the government to spy on them and watch their every move. Why? Because after all, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I'm not worried if someone's spying on me. But it never dawned on them that while they might not be doing anything wrong, it is wrong for the government to spy on them without a warrant. These are the basic rights that our forefathers shed their blood for us to have. And we're tossing them away like old technology that no longer has relevance. When you ask a child today what he wants to become when he grows up, he'll tell you his dreams. I know, I have 5 children. They'll tell you their wildest imaginations. But by the time he's in high school and ready for college, you ask him what he wants to become, he no longer knows. He's confused. He feels like he has no purpose. He tells you that maybe he just needs to talk to his school counselor or take a government test to give him direction, or maybe he needs to get a college degree so he can figure out what he's good at while he's in school. Why? What happened? What happened to that dream and that fire that was in that young boy? I submit to you that the burdens of an expanding government have stamped out the light of the young dreamer. It's like the story of the 2 taxi cab drivers that the journalist was covering in the Cold War. He shared it back in the mid-'80s. He tells us that he took a taxi to the airport in New York on his way to Moscow. When he got in the taxi, there was a young man driving, and they struck up a conversation. As they spoke, he asked the young man what he wanted to do with his life. The young boy here in America spoke up and said, "Well, really, I am a musician. I love to write music and to play songs and to make people happy with my music. I only drive this taxi to pay the bills, but in my spare time, I am pursuing my dream of making music. Even if I never make it big, at least I'll be doing what I love." With that, the journalist smiled, gave him a tip, and continued on to the airport to his plane. When he landed at Moscow, remember at the height of the Cold War, he caught a taxi there in Moscow from the airport to his hotel. In that taxi, there was another young man driving. He happened to speak English, so the journalist asked him what he planned on doing with his life. To that, the young man responded, "I don't know. They haven't told me yet." You see, there is such a stark contrast between liberty and tyranny when they are juxtaposed the one against the other. And I would submit to you, my brothers and sisters, today that we are not living under the banner of liberty that our forefathers shed their blood for. You see, when the government can force feed my children Ritalin and other psychotropic drugs, but I'm not even allowed to buy raw milk, that's not liberty. When a minister cannot endorse a political candidate from his pulpit, but our tax dollars can fund an art project depicting someone urinating on Jesus Christ, that's not liberty. When a child cannot say a prayer at school or a valedictorian is prevented from invoking prayer in their speech, but nudity, violence, and pornography are force-fed in our classrooms in the name of equality and sensitivity training, folks, That's not liberty. You know I can go on and on and on. Thomas Jefferson once said, to compel a man to subsidize with his taxes the propagation of ideas which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. But today you and I are being forced to subsidize abortion, murder, war, and other immoralities that we don't believe in. Jefferson knew this was tyranny. But I'm still thankful to be alive today in this country. Why? Because all hope is not lost. You see, the vestiges of liberty run so deep in our culture and in our country that even the non-stop, relentless barrage against our liberty for over 200 years has not been able to completely squash it out. No, you and I still believe in liberty today. Do we not? And we still love it. But I believe that it's not good enough to feel good about liberty. It's not good enough to say that we love liberty. On the contrary, we have to do something about it. You see, it's not what we say, it's what we do. And that is why I'm honored to be standing here before you today. Because I believe that I'm standing amongst men and women who truly love liberty. You love it because you know it. You know what liberty is. You know what liberty looks like. And you know that your liberties have been taken from you. But because we love liberty, we will stand today like our forefathers did, and we will fight. And we will preserve our liberty in America, and in particular here in Idaho. Why? Because America is worth fighting for, and liberty is worth fighting for. Look, folks, I'm well aware of America's problems. You don't have to list them for me, all right? I get it. But America is a lot like my wife, who's right over here. No, she's not perfect, and neither am I, but she sure is pretty, and I'm dedicated to her protection and her preservation. And I know that America's not perfect, but she sure is pretty, and I'm dedicated and committed to preserving her as well. You see, liberty is not something that you and I originally fought for. We were blessed with it. It is a gift that was given to us. We didn't have to fight for it. But President Reagan wisely said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or, one day, he said, we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States when men were free. You see, now is our time. Preserving American liberty is not just our opportunity, folks. My friend, it is our destiny. You see, destiny calls upon men from time to time, and she never asks permission first. Destiny never says, excuse me, but is now a good time for me to call upon you so that you can fulfill your calling? No, she simply interrupts you in the midst of the cycle of your life and demands that you rise to the challenge. And so here we are. We can do no other. We will rise to the challenge, and we will preserve liberty in America. And how will we do it? We will do it by opposing the federal government's expansion into areas of our lives that are not permitted by the Constitution of the United States of America. We will stand on our constitutional rights by first knowing what the Constitution says and by obeying its precepts. And we will stand shoulder to shoulder, and we will offer our sacred honor once again to preserve this great bastion of liberty. And while I don't believe that we will have to turn to arms in our generation, we at least better be willing to do so if it were to become necessary. Yes, we will have a backbone in this generation. We will be strong and we will be very courageous, because each and every one of us, I believe, was born for such a time as this. Because we love liberty, we will preserve it. Will you stand today with me for liberty, my friend? Will you stand with your neighbor, and will you be willing to chain yourself to the principles of the Constitution and the spirit of the Declaration of Independence and restore this great republic? Will you? Will you work one with another to ensure that America, and Idaho in particular, can shine once again as that bright and shining light, that great city set up on a hill? Yes. Yes, we will all work together. And before our individual lamps go out, we will be able to look at our children in the eye, look at our children and our grandchildren, and say to them, my children, I love you. I love you so much that I fought with my life to preserve liberty for you. And now the great response of liberty is in your hands. Fight for her. Protect her. And for the love of liberty, don't let me down. Thank you, and God bless you.